Hey there.
Yeah.
Ever had that moment where like someone's name just totally vanishes from your memory? You know you should know it, but poof, it's gone.
Yeah, like it's right on the tip of your tongue, but you just can't quite.
Ugh, it's the worst. Well, get ready, because today we're doing a deep dive into this super common situation.
We're going to be dissecting an episode from English Podcast Zone. And guess what? Even the hosts have this awkward moment.
Exactly. And listen, this isn't some boring vocab lesson. We're going way beyond basic phrases to figure out how they actually work, in a real conversations.
Think of it like we're giving you the secret code to smooth and natural English.
I like that. A secret code.
We're going to uncover all the little strategies behind these phrases so you can use them confidently and avoid those embarrassing brain freezes.
Okay, so the podcast episode starts off with this dialogue where someone forgets a name they just learned. It's happened to all of us, right?
Yeah, totally. And they jump right into some useful phrases for navigating this kind of situation. One that I thought was really interesting was in a bit of a hurry.
Okay, yeah. The podcast gives examples like, can you drive faster? I'm in a bit of a hurry, or I can't talk right now. I'm in a bit of a hurry. But what makes that so much better than just saying I'm late?
Well, I think in a bit of a hurry kind of softens the urgency a bit, It makes it less demanding and more polite.
So it's less, I don't know, aggressive.
Exactly. And it kind of fits with how English speakers, especially in casual settings, like to be a little indirect.
Huh. So it's not just the words themselves. It's about how they make people feel.
Right. And that's where the podcast gets really smart. You don't just need to know the phrase, you need to know why it works to use it well.
So in a bit of a hurry becomes this multi-tool for getting out of situations where you don't have much time.
Exactly. And it leads perfectly into another important part of the dialogue, contact details.
Which on the surface seems pretty simple. But the podcast points out that using contact details instead of listing everything out makes you sound more professional.
Oh, definitely. It's much more streamlined. You sound more confident and competent. It's way better than saying, could I get your phone number, email, and maybe your social media handles?
It's like one of those little details you wouldn't notice at first.
Yeah, but once you know about it, it makes a huge difference in how people see you.
Okay, so let's be real. The most awkward part is when you totally blank on someone's name.
And the podcast has this perfect phrase for it, slipped my mind. It just makes it sound so much less like you've done something wrong.
It's like a gentle way of saying, oops, I forgot, without making a big deal out of it.
And it makes people sympathize with you, right?
Yeah.
Because we've all forgotten appointments or birthdays or even, what we had for breakfast.
Totally. The podcast then talks about a phrase that's perfect for admitting you're not good at something, but in a charming way. Terrible with.
I love this one. Saying something like, I'm terrible with names or terrible with directions is honest, but also a little funny.
It's like you're making fun of yourself a little.
Exactly. And people tend to like others who are genuine and can laugh at themselves.
So it's better to be honest about your flaws than to pretend you're perfect.
Exactly. And that's a good lesson for anything, not just learning English.
The podcast also goes into the different ways you can say around here, which I thought was interesting.
Yeah, those little differences in meaning can be tricky. Around here is general. Right around the corner means something is super close, and around there is even more vague.
It's almost like a little lesson in how to talk about locations.
Yeah, and those small distinctions are really important for being fluent and understanding how people really talk.
So we've covered a lot. We talked about how to say you're in a hurry, how to get someone's contact info, and even how to admit you forgot someone's name. It seems like each phrase has all this extra meaning behind it.
Absolutely. And that's what makes this deep dive so cool. We're not just learning words, we're learning how to use them like a native speaker.
This is great. Before we move on to the next part, what are the most important things you think our listeners should remember from this part?
Okay, well, first, remember that fluency isn't just about grammar rules. It's about understanding the culture and how people really use language.
And don't be afraid to make mistakes.
Yes. Mistakes are how you learn.
Great advice. All right, let's move on to the next set of phrases. Okay, so now the podcast shifts gears a bit. They go beyond individual phrases and start talking about bigger conversational strategies. And they spend some time on how to deal with forgetting someone's name.
Ah, the classic brain freeze moment.
Right. But they actually have some really good advice. They say, instead of panicking, try to subtly get the person to tell you their name again.
Like maybe ask for their business card or have them write down their email address.
Yeah, because their full name is usually right there.
Yeah.
And it doesn't make you look bad. The key is to just stay relaxed and keep the conversation going.
Exactly. That's what separates a good English speaker from a truly fluent one. Being able to think on your feet and handle those unexpected situations.
And get this, the hosts actually share their own stories about forgetting names. I thought that was really cool.
It makes them seem more human, like they're not perfect. They make mistakes too.
Totally. It makes you feel like it's okay to mess up sometimes.
Yeah, mistakes are just part of learning. It's all about changing how you think about them. Instead of being afraid to make mistakes, you can use them to learn and get better.
So the podcast also points out some mistakes that people often make with these phrases. I think that's super helpful.
Oh yeah, like using terrible at when you should say terrible with.
Oh, right. So it's terrible with for things you're not good at, but terrible at for specific skills.
You got it. It's a small difference, but it matters. Paying attention to those little details is what makes someone sound really fluent.
They also talk about how important it is to use these phrases in the right situations. Like, you wouldn't say right around the corner unless something was actually very close by.
Right, you got to pay attention to the context. And that means really listening to what the other person is saying and how they're saying it.
It's like being a language detective. You got to look for all the clues.
Exactly. And that's what's so fun about learning a language. It's more than just memorizing rules. It's about figuring out how people actually use it.
The podcast really stresses how important it is to practice using these phrases. You can't just read about them. You got to try them out.
I totally agree. That's when it all clicks. When you actually use the phrases in real conversations, that's how you really learn them.
And they keep saying, don't be afraid to make mistakes. They actually see mistakes as part of learning.
Yeah, it's all about progress, not being perfect.
So, do you think we've convinced our listener that these phrases are more than just words?
I hope so. I think they're starting to see that these phrases have a lot of meaning and cultural stuff packed into them.
Yes, I think a whole new way of thinking about English. And I hope they feel like they can start using these phrases themselves.
Me too. The more you practice, the better you'll get. And remember, it's okay to mess up sometimes. That's how you learn.
Great advice. Okay, so the podcast wraps up with this really cool message about fluency. We'll talk about that in the last part of our deep dive. Okay, so are you ready for this? The podcast ends with something that I think is so important for anyone learning English.
Oh, yeah. I'm curious. Tell me more.
They basically say that fluency isn't just about, perfect grammar or having a huge vocabulary.
I mean, yeah, it's more than just what you learn in a textbook, right?
Exactly. They say that real fluency is about being able to communicate what you're thinking, confidently and in a way that sounds natural.
Makes sense to me. It's about getting your point across, even if you make a little grammar mistake here and there.
Yeah, and they even point out that, even native speakers make mistakes all the time. It's kind of what makes language interesting.
It's about not getting hung up on being perfect and just letting the conversation flow.
And they want listeners to focus on progress, not perfection. It's about always learning and adapting your language skills when you're talking to people in real life.
That's a really cool way to look at it, don't you think? It takes the pressure off and makes learning a language more fun.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
They also talk about how important it is to pay attention to how native speakers use language. If you listen closely to how they use these phrases in different situations, you can kind of absorb those little nuances and start using them yourself.
It's almost like you're picking it up without even realizing it, right? Like osmosis or something.
Yeah, and in the end, they remind us that the best way to become fluent is to practice, practice, practice. The more you use English in real life, the more comfortable and natural it will feel.
I couldn't agree more. You got to just get out there and talk to people. That's how you really improve.
So think about those key takeaways if you want to take your English to the next level.
Yeah, don't worry too much about making mistakes. Embrace the messiness of it all. Have fun.
Exactly. Fluency is a journey, not a destination, right? Be patient with yourself, be proud of how far you've come, and keep exploring this amazing world of English. Well, that was a fascinating dive, wouldn't you say? We went beyond just defining phrases. We really dug deep into how they work in real conversations. And we even got some great advice on how to approach language learning, in a way that's more fun and less stressful. Until next time, stay curious.